All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to speak with you all today as we share information about the Solar for All opportunity. I'm also excited to introduce our coalition partners, the Energy Trust of Oregon and Bonneville Environmental Foundation, who will be joining the Department of Energy, the Oregon Department of Energy, as co-hosts on this webinar today. On the call, I'm joined by my colleagues here at the Oregon Department of Energy, including Rob Delmar, our Senior Policy Analyst, Wendy Simons, our Energy Policy Analyst, and assisting with hosting our webinar today is Patricia Phillips and Tony Raker. From Energy Trust of Oregon, we are joined by Ryan Cook, a Senior Manager in the Innovation and Development team, and from Bonneville Environmental Foundation, Evan Ramsey, Senior Director of the Renewables Program. Thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we get started, just wanted to provide a quick reminder of how to use WebEx if this is a platform you're unfamiliar with. So please note that only the presenters will have their cameras on and will have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. With that said, if you have a question during the presentation, please go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll have an opportunity to call on you. The raise your hand button can be found either by your name in the participants list or at the bottom of your screen in the reactions button. When you do raise your hand, once we call on you, the host will be able to unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question. If you are on the phone through calling in today, you can raise your hand by using the *3 and unmute yourself using *6. If you do put a question in the chat, please make sure to select all panelists or all participants so that the right people can see your question and respond to it. Next slide, please. For today's webinar, we will be sharing the latest information. We also want to hear your questions and comments and answer those questions that we can at this time. We'll be covering a lot of general information on the federal legislation that's created the opportunities which have presented these historic levels of federal funding, which includes this particular funding opportunity, Solar for All. We'll provide an overview of the Solar for All competition presented from the US EPA, and then we'll move into a description of Oregon's early stage concept. Lastly, we'll be seeking your thoughts and questions today during the webinar, but we'll also be sharing a link to an online portal if we don't have enough time to get through everything, or if there's something you'd just like to take a little bit longer to consider before sharing with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is a little bit of information about who we are at the Oregon Department of Energy. At the Oregon Department of Energy, our mission is to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. We achieve this mission by providing a central repository of energy data, information, and analysis, a venue for problem-solving Oregon's energy challenges, energy education and technical assistance, regulation and oversight, and energy programs and activities. And what brings us here today is the Solar for All competition. The Oregon Department of Energy intends to apply as a prime recipient of the federal grant program on behalf of the coalition, which is comprised of the Oregon Department of Energy, known as ODO, and Energy Trust of Oregon and Bonneville Environmental Foundation. Next slide, please. So we'd like to start by learning a little bit more about our audience today. Please introduce yourself by typing your name and any organizational affiliation and email address into the chat. That way we can see who is joining us. And it will also help us know and get an idea of what your perspectives may be and how we can possibly engage in follow-up if it's needed. Next slide, please. So the federal funds that we're going to be discussing today came from part of an overall package that has been presented by Congress, two different packages actually, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Together, these represent many, many different federal programs that impact energy, climate, and other areas of infrastructure and healthcare. Under this provides an opportunity known as the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund under the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. So, and in that, Solar for All is one of the parts of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which brings us here today. So it's one of 3 competitions under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And I will note that out of those 3 competitions, it's also the only one that states are eligible to apply for directly. Under Solar for All, the US EPA anticipates providing $7 billion in funding across the nation. The grant funds are to be used to transform the solar market by enabling access for low-income households and residents of disadvantaged communities exclusively. And that's a key element that we'll be thinking about as we are preparing our application, and an aspect we'd love to hear more from all of you about what we can think about in order to be successful as we go about trying to achieve that mission. Next slide, please. As part of these recent federal investments, the Solar for All competition is a covered program under the Biden-Harris administration's Justice 40 initiative. The Justice 40 initiative is seeking to invest federal funds so that 40% of the benefits of these funds serve disadvantaged communities. This complements the administration's comprehensive approach to advance equity in line with Executive Order 13985. There's also broader considerations for community benefits, specifically seeking to integrate benefits for labor and workforce at a community level as part of a community benefits plan in this application process. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering what exactly is a disadvantaged community? And under this competition, the primary tool is this climate and economic justice screening tool that has been provided by the White House. The areas shaded in gray on the map are the census tracts identified as disadvantaged communities by this tool. Some of the darker gray areas indicate where tribal lands are located as well. While in this tool, it provides census tract information and classification as to whether or not a community meets the definition of disadvantage. You can see in the box that the level of detail you can observe from the tool varies quite a bit if you zoom in. And we have a sample where you can see the details of Medford, Oregon in this particular example to see it really can get down to a neighborhood level. Next slide, please. The US EPA is issuing 3 types of options under the Solar for All competition, and it's primarily based on geographic coverage. One option is based on a specific state or territory, another option is based on tribal governments and communities, and the third option is based on a regional approach. Next slide, please. And so the option that we are here today about is actually option number 1. We are specifically working on an application for the geographic coverage within the state of Oregon. Next slide, please. So let's cover some of the key deadlines just to get started. As a precursor to an application, a notice of intent was required, and Oregon did submit our notice of intent on July 28, 2023. And we are tentatively estimating a $100 million application, which falls into the small award category. However, as we continue to refine our application and our plans and further project the number of households we'll be able to collectively serve, we may revisit that amount if we believe we have strategies that can benefit more than 10,000 households, which is the recommended guidelines from the EPA for exceeding the small program award category. The next key deadline is that the application is due to the US EPA on September 26th. And following that, we will need to wait to see if we are selected for an award. This is a competitive grant application, and so that will take some time for EPA to run that process. But the US EPA does anticipate that grantees will be selected approximately in July of 2024. And then if we are fortunate to be selected, then there would be a 5-year period of performance, and we would have an option to use the first year for planning purposes out of those 5 years. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering what some of the outcomes of this award might be. What might the impact of this look like? Well, the US EPA has directed us to provide information on the outcomes and benefits we anticipate our proposal could accomplish if awarded. These include impacts such as the number of total households projected to benefit from the program, the amount of funding per household, the megawatts of solar capacity deployed, the tons of CO2 avoided, and household savings, as well as average funding per household savings. In addition to that, there are requests for meaningful benefit plans. So one of those examples is that setting a minimum that 20% household energy savings is of the average household utility bill in the utility territory is achieved through deployment of these funds. So basically, we're looking to help save energy through solar technologies, particularly with low-income households and disadvantaged communities. We're also looking to increase low-income and disadvantaged households' access to solar deployment options, deliver on energy resilience and grid benefits by creating capacity that can deliver electricity to low-income and disadvantaged communities in the event of a grid outage, and maximizing household and community ownership models in solar technologies. Next slide, please. So in order to achieve those impacts and outcomes, we'll have to take on certain activities. The application from the US EPA breaks those down into a distributed solar market strategy, a financial assistance strategy, which they would like to see 75% of the funds to be used for financial assistance for these projects, and then a project deployment technical assistance strategy and an equitable access and meaningful involvement plan. All of these applications right now are early stage concepts, which we'd love to discuss with you all today. And with that, I'll hand this over to Rob Delmar to start to introduce our early stage concept.
Thank you, Jen. And just an audio check. Is it coming through okay? All righty.
Yep.
And there we go. Okay, so for Oregon's concept to spend these funds, we've got some broad goals that I'll describe momentarily, and then we also have some more program-specific ideas that I'll cover in future slides. So from the big picture, we really want to utilize these federal funds to bring benefits of solar installations to low-income and other disadvantaged communities in Oregon. And to do that, we know we're going to need to be working with community partners to reach out to these disadvantaged communities. It will involve increased incentives for single-family, multifamily, and community solar projects that provide benefits to low-income participants. We also would like to develop some long-term strategies that can remain in place post 2030 when the federal funds are no longer available. We would like essentially low-income participation in future solar programs in Oregon, even when the federal funds are all spent. And finally, kind of over all of these goals, we would like to have a workforce development program so that we have a diverse and equitable workforce to essentially install all of this solar that we hope to install in the next 5 years. So this is a quick view of the different program tracks that we would like to develop within Solar for All. And it starts with single family, and this will be, again, an increased incentive for low-income participants to be able to access benefits of solar installations on their own homes. And for folks that do not own their own homes, we have plans to also develop a multifamily incentive And I'll get into these in a little bit more detail in a moment. And when we can't get the solar on site, we also have two different approaches for community solar projects. And one is community solar in investor-owned utility service territories, and another is community solar in consumer-owned utility service territories, and that's most of the rural parts of the state. And again, overarching all of this, we would like to be working on workforce development so that we can reach into every corner of the state with an able workforce and living wages to get all this work done. In the single family program, we really want to utilize these federal funds to increase the incentive stack and cover a high percentage of project costs. And to date, we have had many different solar programs in Oregon. They've provided millions of dollars worth of incentives to Oregonians over the years. And primarily, we've been able to reach affluent households and moderate income households, but we haven't done a great job of reaching low income households with these programs. And so increasing this incentive stack with the federal dollars is one way we can see to do that. We will be leveraging Energy Trust of Oregon programs and the Oregon Solar and Storage Rebate programs that are already developed, already have a known application process and online application platforms. We want to utilize these existing programs to essentially minimize the administrative burden for contractors and homeowners to access these additional federal funds. We also recognize that to reach a new group of program participants, we're going to have to coordinate with partners, and the Oregon Housing, CAP agencies, Habitat for Humanity, all of these organizations and many others we plan to work with so that we can make sure that we can access this new market, and also coordinate work with other contractors that may be doing roofing or insulation or efficiency work in the same low-income housing space. And finally, we'd like to explore ways to extend the federal funds to essentially provide support to the low-income market beyond the grant period ending in 2030. And when we talk about increasing the incentive stack, this is a very simplified example of what that incentive stack might look like for a typical project. And so in this table, we look at a system size of 5 kilowatts, which is a little smaller than an average system size in the overall residential market in Oregon, but still a system that can generate around 60%, 40 to 60% of the household energy consumption for a typical home. We're looking at an average cost of $4 per watt, which is what we see in the residential market now. So that gives us a total project cost of $20,000 per installation. Our current programs are the Oregon Solar and Storage Rebate Program, which provides a $5,000 incentive. And for customers that are within Energy Trust of Oregon service territories, that's customers of PGE and Pacific Power, there is also the Energy Trust Solar Within Reach rebate. And so in this example, we have the $5,000 rebate that would be made available by Energy Trust for a 5 kW system in Pacific Power territory. So when these numbers start adding up, we see there's two more pieces here. One is a federal tax credit, and that is calculated at 30% of the eligible project cost of the system. And that has a few issues with it in the low income space, and we'll get into those in a moment. And then finally, what's left in this stack is what is normally the homeowner contribution, which may not be a huge lift for some of the more affluent homeowners, but for low income, it proves to be a real hurdle for getting into the solar market. And that's this estimated funding gap. And for our purposes right now, this is serving as a proxy for the federal incentive that we would likely offer in Solar for All. So this is just a real quick look at the project cost and the financial incentive stack that could bring solar installations within the cost range of low-income households in Oregon. And a few things that we need to keep in mind. One, monetizing the federal tax credit can be a challenge if the homeowner, and in some cases low-income homeowners, don't have adequate federal tax liability to take that federal tax credit. And as we saw before, that's worth $4,500 to $6,000 depending on where the system is and how big it is. It's a big piece of the puzzle. And we're going to be working with federal partners to see how we might utilize a new option to get a direct pay rather than a tax credit for that share of the funding puzzle. And to do that, we think we're going to have to work with third-party partners, and those might be nonprofit entities within the community. It could be done at a statewide level. It could be done with commercial partners, and that's something that we're going to be working on throughout the application period, but also well into the first year of the program implementation and planning phase. We also would like to leverage additional funding partners to hopefully increase volume. And if we go back to the incentives stack, you see the $5,000 incentives from the Oregon Solar and Storage Rebate Program, that's OSSRP, and also Energy Trust of Incentive Rebates, $5,000. Those incentives are subject to the budgets within these programs. And we can foresee a scenario where the real limiting factor to the number of homes that we can serve is not the federal funds, but the funding within our own in-state programs. So what we would like to do on this second bullet point is see if we can leverage additional funding partners to essentially increase the volume of the number of households that we can serve with our existing programs within the state. And then, of course, post-grant planning, this is hopefully leaving some tools in place that will enable the solar industry to remain active in low-income spaces after the grant period. And of course, this involves supporting the existing solar industry in Oregon and hopefully completing some workforce development. A few of the questions that we've got, and again, as Jen mentioned, we have a portal open for folks to ponder these questions at your own time. But really, some of the key questions we have is, how can the coalition reach low-income and disadvantaged communities? How can the coalition serve residents in manufactured housing? Should a financing product be developed? Again, this might be used to increase the volume in the program. And then how can community organizations support and benefit from these program offerings? Again, there's no urgency to answer these questions today. We have a Q&A portal open where we hope to gather your feedback in the coming weeks. Moving on to multifamily. Here, the objective is to support solar installations for low-income households in multifamily housing developments. And again, the idea is to utilize federal funds to increase the incentive stack and help bring these solar projects onto more of these multifamily housing developments. And again, we're able to leverage Energy Trust of Oregon and Oregon Solar and Storage Rebate programs to both bring state funding to the incentive stack, but also to minimize the administrative burden. And we also see in the multifamily space that this is a good place to support storage installations where we may be able to provide backup power options for residents in multifamily housing units. And this backup power might be able to support a common space, heating, cooling, refrigerators, charging, the types of services that are most needed when the power does go out. And so we would like to bring that energy resilience into the multifamily space. We have programs that do it in single family, but for the federal funds, we just get a lot more bang for the buck doing storage in multifamily, which is why we would like to do it in this program to really stretch those federal funds for storage. And so again, here's how it would kind of look where we have a rooftop solar program, and that would deliver bill savings to the residents of multifamily houses. And then finally, and also battery storage for energy resilience. And that brings us to some questions. And the first one is, how can the coalition ensure that the benefits from a solar and storage installation are passed on to the residents of a multifamily housing unit and not just the owner? And we have several developers in Oregon that have already done this successfully. And we think that we can get this built into a program so that we have a prerequisite that anyone participating is passing these benefits on to the residents and not just the owner. And of course, this is another reason why we like battery storage in multifamily, is that those benefits automatically pass to the residents of the building because they're available as backup power in the event of a power outage. And so it's a way to ensure positive benefits right to the residents. Again, a similar question here. How can the coalition reach low-income and disadvantaged communities? Should a financing product be developed? And how can community organizations support and benefit from the program offerings? So that's the concept for multifamily. And I would like to just,
Rob, we have a question in the chat.
sure. And if someone could read that, I don't actually have easy
Can
access to that chat.
multifamily vendors leverage meter aggregation and only in IOUs?
That's a good question. So the question is related to how a solar installation might be essentially spread across a multifamily housing unit where a lot of cases, these multifamily housing developments have very minimal common loads for a solar installation to work on. And so if you can aggregate the meters from all of the residents, you bring a lot more load to the site for a solar project to be able to support. And this is one of the sort of technical questions around multifamily and solar that our developers are already facing. And so we certainly will be looking at this. And as mentioned in IOU territories, we have some meter aggregation programs that have already been implemented, and it may be that we can come up with a program offering for investor-owned utilities. For consumer-owned utilities, meter aggregation is a matter for board or city council or other governing body approval. And so what we would like to do is develop a program that has the flexibility to support projects in any utility service territory, and hope that the meter aggregation is one of those items that can be worked out with the developer utility partnership that's put together for these projects. But it's a really good question and one of the challenges of solar on multifamily developments. So does that answer the question? And I guess we can.
Yes, Vito confirmed, yes, that does answer it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this slide is just a very brief thumbnail view of the two community solar programs that we're proposing. And it's brief because we will have Energy Trust of Oregon and Bonneville Environmental Foundation presenting in much greater detail in the coming slides of what's proposed for these programs. But again, our objective is to support projects in the Oregon Community Solar Program, and that's the existing program that is already underway. And we would do this by partnering with Energy Trust, utilizing federal funds to provide financial assistance to community solar projects that benefit low-income participants, and then finally leveraging the existing Oregon Community Solar Program to deliver that. And then the other option is community solar in consumer-owned utility service territories. And this is a program that we'll be building from scratch, and we will be partnering with Bonneville Environmental Foundation to do that. And this will be a new program to provide federal funds to hopefully get community solar projects installed across the state in consumer-owned utility territories. And just as a heads up, Bonneville Environmental Foundation will also likely be working with other Northwest regional partners to develop sister programs in other states. And that is still, we're not sure exactly how that's going to look, but it may give us a little benefit to have a Northwest regional approach. So with that, I will pass it on to Ryan at Energy Trust. And again, questions can be put in the chat, or we can save them for the end, or you can go visit the questions portal and answer them at your leisure. So with that, Ryan, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Rob. So hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Cook. I'm a Senior Manager of Innovation and Developments at Energy Trust of Oregon. And we are excited to talk to you about some of the ideas that we're bringing support community solar projects in IOU service territory. Again, as Rob mentioned, leveraging the existing Oregon Community Solar Program to make the best use of these Solar for All dollars. Next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly talk just about who we are, and then a little bit about background about the Oregon Community Solar Program, and then talk about two different concepts for Solar for All funding dollars. The first having to do with enhanced incentives for projects that meet the program's carve-out criteria, and the second having to do with some non-financial technical assistance for community-based projects. Feedback that we'd love to hear from this group. Next slide. So Energy Trust of Oregon is an independent nonprofit. Here, many of you likely know us as the administrator of ratepayer-funded energy efficiency and renewable energy programs here in Oregon. We are also actually part of the program administration team for the Oregon Community Solar Program, which is overseen by OPUC, but we're not really here in our program administration capacity today. So we serve 2.4 million customers in Oregon and Southwest Washington, providing both energy efficiency and renewable energy financial assistance, technical assistance, and all sorts of other great things. And on the solar side, we serve customers of Portland General Electric and Pacific Power with our renewable energy programs. Notably, our renewable energy funding that we receive through ratepayers, 25% of it needs to serve low and moderate income customers. And to date, our two main programs that help us achieve this are first, our Solar Within Reach incentive program for single-family residential customers, which Rob's already talked a little bit about. And second, project incentives for community solar projects that benefit low-income customers. And the concept that I'll be talking about today really expands that second strategy. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Oregon Community Solar Program. This is a program that serves the three electric IOUs in the state of Oregon, so PG Pacific Power, as well as Idaho Power, which serves the Ontario area. And some of the basic program requirements are all projects need to be sized between 25 kW and 3 megawatts. 10% of each project is required to serve low-income customers, and low-income subscribers need to receive a mandatory discounts in the amount that they're charged. The amount that a project manager can charge a low-income subscriber is capped for new projects at 60% of, so 40% discount, 60% of the value of the bill credits that the customer receives. And as part of the program administration team, there's a low-income facilitator, which is Community Energy Project, who's responsible both for verifying low-income customer eligibility and who also will recruit and refer low-income households to projects that wanted them to be enrolled in their projects. So we already have a lot of infrastructure that we can use to build towards and meet some of the Solar for All goals. Next slide. Within the program, there's a feature called the carve-outs, which is essentially for projects that go above and beyond in serving low-income customers or involving communities in the design of projects. So there's a few different ways to qualify for the carve-outs within the Oregon Community Solar Program. First, any project that reserves 50%, again, the program minimum is 10%, any project that reserves 50% of project capacity for low-income subscribers would qualify for the carve-out. Second, any project that's managed by a nonprofit or a cooperative would qualify. And then a project that partners creatively with a community-based organization in the outreach of a project would also qualify for the carve-outs. The program is a limited capacity program. There's 160 megawatts that have been authorized by the commission, and about 25% of that, or 40 megawatts, is reserved for projects that meet carve-out capacity. Now, where we are today, nearly all of the program capacity that's not part of the carve-out has been allocated to projects, but very little of the carve-out capacity has been. So we have 47 megawatts remaining in the program, of which 36 megawatts is reserved for carve-out projects. So primarily what we're seeing the opportunity in Solar for All is to use this substantial amount of funding to fill up the program carve-out and make sure that we're delivering really considerable benefits through the Oregon Community Solar Program that are in line with the priorities that EPA has outlined. Next slide. So our two goals are one, making sure that we're able to, there we go. One is making sure that we are able to get more community-led community solar projects built and realized through the program. And second, making sure that we're able to make more low-income subscriptions available to participants in the program. And there's really two different strategies that I'm going to talk about that we see as useful here. One is addressing financial barriers with a strong and stable incentive for projects that meet those carve-out criteria that I was just talking about. And second, by addressing non-financial barriers like program complexity by providing enhanced technical assistance and potentially project matchmaking services to community-led projects. Next slide. So for strategy one, and here we're really talking about financial assistance and incentives, the problem that we found is that many carve-out projects will require additional funding to get across the finish line. And while there have been past incentive offers available through Energy Trust, through ODO, through USDA, PSEF, and utilities to provide grants and upfront assistance to projects, many of these are kind of temporary and ad hoc, and there's not a long-term, consistent, statewide incentive source that's available to help get carve-out projects developed through the Community Solar Program. And so our core concept would be to put together a stable incentive that's available to any project that meets both Solar for All requirements, meaning that 50% of the project would be available to eligible residential participants, and also CSP carve-out criteria, which would be 50% low-income participation. We're interested in targeting a mix of small community-led projects as well as larger, potentially private sector projects, and would be intending to offer an incentive to any project that's able to meet that 50% low-income participation threshold while delivering those mandatory bill discounts. We also know that to enable some of the smaller community scale projects, there might need to be an additional incentive that helps address some of the higher construction costs and incur as you go down in size. So we're looking at a long-term stable incentive offer that would help build out the community solar program carve-out. Next slide. The second strategy that we're looking at, getting away from strictly financial assistance, is thinking about how to overcome some of the non-financial barriers in the program. So we do know that the Oregon Community Solar Program is a complex program to navigate, especially for a community-based organization that is not a professional solar developer and who might not be well suited to be a long-term owner and manager of a project. So as Energy Trust, we already have a few different technical assistance tools we've put to use, such as early stage community solar development assistance, as well as project-specific coaching and technical assistance, which we partner with BEF to deliver to help some of these community-led carve-out projects come forward. But we have seen that that's not enough, and that there's still a substantial unmet demand from community groups that would like to make community solar projects work, but have both financial and non-financial barriers. So we're really interested in using this funding as a way to dramatically increase the technical assistance that's being offered to community groups that may want to be parts of the community solar program. And we're also considering taking a more assertive role in the program and providing sort of a matchmaking service between project developers, CBOs, and project managers. And I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. So next slide, please. So the way that this could work, this sort of enhanced matchmaking service, Energy Trust would first establish partnerships with community organizations that want to bring community solar to their communities, who are willing to support community solar customer enrollment and who represent communities that are eligible for Solar for All dollars, but don't really have the interest or capabilities to be a long-term manager of a project. We then use Solar for All dollars and potentially other dollars to manage a procurement process to develop community solar projects by Energy Trust's Trade Ally Network. For example, on non-residential facilities that might lack the on-site, that might be a good candidate for solar, but not have the on-site load that would make a traditional net metering installation work well. Then we would separately procure and contract with one or multiple organizations to serve as a project manager for some of these projects. So we'd be separately building partnerships and then aligning both the three organizations, the community groups that would bring the communities to the projects, the Trade Ally contractors that would develop the projects, and then the project managers that would be responsible for them long term. And there's still a lot of dots to be connected here. For example, how project ownership would work for some of these projects. But we're interested in using this as a role to really identify what is the right role for community groups to play in the program, and then helping bring the partners to make those projects be realized. Next slide, please. So there are a few requirements of Solar for All that need to be navigated and aligning it well with the Oregon Community Solar Program. We'll talk about a few of them here. The first is that there's different income criteria in the Oregon Community Solar Program and in Solar for All. The requirements for the income-based requirement for Solar for All is generally a bit more rigid. And so not all participants that would qualify as low-income customers in the Community Solar Program would qualify as eligible recipients in Solar for All. And that's something that would need to be navigated both by the program and by projects. Second is the geographic requirements of Justice 40, which Jen already mentioned. 40% of the total spending would need to benefit customers that live in designated Justice 40 areas. And we imagine that requirement would flow through to any Oregon community solar projects that receive funding. And this could be especially tricky to make sure that we're complying within PGE service territory, where there's relatively few geographic areas that are identified by the Justice 40 tool. So that's something that would need to be navigated as well. And then third, there's an opportunity to use Solar for All dollars to integrate storage and to install solar plus storage on critical facilities and provide resilience in times when the grid goes down, which is something that is technically allowed within the community solar program, but there isn't a clear pathway to make it work. So some program revisions to the community solar program would be necessary to make it possible to enable storage. And that's something that we're interested in seeing if there's a possibility to make it work. Next slide. And so some of the areas that we'd love feedback on from the stakeholder community is first is the core incentive concept that we're proposing viable. Do we think that's going to be an effective way to fill the program carve out and really deliver community solar to the desired populations? Second is the matchmaking concept that we laid out, both needed and viable. Third, what else can we do to address some of the non-financial barriers that small-scale community solar projects encounter?
All righty, thank you, Ryan. And yeah, we will move right on to Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and Evan will walk us through this concept.
Thank you, Rob, and everyone here on the webinar. Thanks for joining. I see a lot of friendly names in the chat, a lot of experts in community solar, and would value your input as we move this program forward here. Move to the next slide, please. I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation and our work, and how that relates to community solar and where we're going to go from here. Just to recap, I'm Evan Ramsey. I'm the Senior Director of the Renewables Program here at BEF. I've been doing solar for over 16 years, and we've been working with many of our consumer-owned utility partners in Oregon and in the region to assist them in scoping and delivering community solar projects, among other technologies. But this is the brief overview of what I will get into. And at the end, certainly want your input on how we're designing this program to serve consumer-owned utilities. These are really projects that are enabled by these utilities when there's no mandating policy from the state. It really is up to our utility partners in how they design these projects, and we want to provide the right kind of support and resources to them as we move into this 5-year program. Next slide, please. So organizationally, BEF, we have a focus on energy, carbon, and water, and we have a national water stewardship program, energy education program. Our renewables program is very focused in the Pacific Northwest here, and then we do also deal in renewable energy certificates, carbon offsets, and water restoration certificates. Next slide, please. Our renewables program has had a core focus of late in these areas. We do have a strong focus on our consumer-owned utility partners, both in Oregon and regionally. And we've helped them in a variety of ways, from feasibility studies to technical assistance and project grant funding. We've done most of our electric vehicle programming in partnership with utilities. We have also been advancing tribal renewable energy projects and have been involved in low-income solar programming and projects for about the past 7 or 8 years. Next slide, please. When we focus on low-income benefiting solar, we are really focused on providing really what the goals are of this EPA Solar for All program, which is economic and environmental benefits to disadvantaged communities. And BEF, we do that almost exclusively through strong partnerships. We are always working with utilities, tribes, local governments, affordable housing providers, other nonprofits. The list goes on. We really feel like we can go further together, and we rely on our partners to help.
New spreadsheet. I'm really proud of
utilize.
myself. I feel like
Ruchi, you might want to mute there. Some of the services we provide are in the right column there. It runs the gamut from early scoping, financial analysis, all the way to project management and contractor selection, and even some of our energy education programs. Now, this is what we have been doing historically and in the past. Moving forward, the role we fill might look a little different within Oregon's program and regionally, and that's hopefully what we can help co-design and plan for moving forward. Next slide, please. Just to illustrate some of the partnerships that we've formalized over the years, this is even a small smattering of the partners that we've engaged with. And this is a little bit of a dated slide, but you can see the range of partners from nonprofit to public to private. And I probably could have 5 more slides listing the great partnerships that we've been privileged to participate in. Next slide, please. A couple examples of low-income benefiting solar that we've advanced with our partners. The one on the left there actually is somewhat of a mashup of meter aggregation, speaking to Vito's question in the chat, where we worked with Fleet Development and Chrisman Development on a USDA-supported property where the property owner in this case decided to take on the utility bills of the residents and changed a multi-metered apartment building into a master metered scenario, and was able to get USDA to approve taking on loan for the solar project. So that was a first as far as we know in the USDA space. That project was done back in 2018, I believe. Jim and Sally's apartments in the middle, we attempted to use some DOE weatherization funds for this project, which would have been the first in the nation for community solar. Ended up running into some income qualification challenges there in order to qualify for the DOE funds. And luckily, the Energy Trust was there and available to fill that funding gap and realize one of the carve-out projects in the IOU Community Solar Program. And then on the right, there was a very cool project in partnership with St. Vincent de Paul and Emerald PUD. This is down in the Cottage Grove area. At a mobile home park that St. Vincent de Paul rehabilitated, and with some support from Odo and a local contractor, Advanced Energy Systems, we were able to patch together enough funding to do a project that benefited all 40-something residents of that mobile home park. So, with some strong partnerships and some creativity, we can replicate these kinds of models or create new ones here with our consumer-owned utility partners. Next slide, please. This is a really cool project that we were a part of. It's located in Montana, but I wanted to share this just as an example of the art of the possible here. Again, partnership being the theme here. Blackfeet Community College, the Hart Butte High School, Grid Alternatives, Glacier Electric Cooperative, and BEF all came together to scope and deliver a shared community solar project that benefits exclusively the tribal serving school and the tribal members in the immediate vicinity of this school. In addition, Grid Alternatives provided workforce development training and on-site opportunities for tribal members to get exposure to solar installation, and that resulted in 2 of those tribal members getting full-time jobs with Grid Alternatives to do more solar installation work across the West. And in addition, we were able to include one of the educators at the school in our energy education program to really build up their capacity to teach about energy in the classroom and to provide tools and resources to other educators in that district to help build much broader awareness through our CE's Clean Energy Fellows program. Next slide, please. So, we've been helping and in a supporting role to our COU community solar projects. And, we've learned a lot of lessons in this process, but, unlike the investor-owned utility community solar program, each one of these COU projects had to be customized. It had to be tailored for that specific community. It had to be, cited in a specific way. It had to get specific, board or commissioner approval to move forward. And, that takes a lot of time and effort to kind of reinvent the wheel every time. And so, moving forward with, many more resources looking forward than we have seen in the past, we might be able to design a product or a program that scales a little bit more effectively or can apply to a lot more specific utilities than a one-off approach. Looking backwards and what we're seeing today, the contracts with the Bonneville Power Administration have limited to some degree our utilities' ability to do community solar at scale. And looking forward, that environment may change in the near term with new contracts being proposed and signed over the next few years. So I know our consumer and utility representatives are tracking that pretty closely, and the more information you can share with us as those contracts materialize, the better we can design a Solar for All program that works within that environment. Staff capacity is a big one, and this is a consistent theme that I've seen across any organization, really, whether it's a private business, public agency, nonprofit partner, and utilities as well, is if you do not have the staff capacity to advance a project and someone to carry that torch and be a champion, you will not likely succeed. So how do we address that barrier strategically and across the state and with utility specific considerations in mind? That's something we will have to plan for. Siting, I don't know if we've mentioned that on the webinar yet today, but we have limited options in Oregon when it comes to siting projects, whether it's on farmland or high value soils. And so we may need some creativity in that vein. Of late, we have actually been involved with several irrigation districts who are interested in hosting floating solar on their regulation reservoirs. So, there might be some creative ways where we can site projects that don't conflict with these land use rules we have in effect in Oregon. And then, I'll rattle through the rest of the list here, but, consumer-owned utilities have lower rates for energy than investor-owned utility territories. And that can create challenges for how valuable more solar energy is and can create longer paybacks for projects. So how do we navigate that dynamic, and how do we do projects that can be valuable to both the utility and the low-income participants? Billing systems, not all utilities have modernized or integrated the latest software systems. And so distribution of bill credits can be different on a utility by utility basis. And, these are all areas maybe some technical assistance could assist with creating a more standardized product. Meaningful benefits and how those accrue to participants. That can be a challenge if we don't have enough subsidy, if the bill credit rates are low. And so that's something that EPA will require and that I think we all want to see out of this program. So that has been a barrier in the past, and hopefully we can overcome that a little more easily moving forward. Similarly, equitable participation, with few and far between projects that are seeking and achieving the goals here that EPA and this coalition has. It's been a challenge in the past, but with some targeted subsidies and the right approach in the program, we could probably improve on that one. Customization, I think I mentioned that several times, and then scale. Scale is another one where investor-owned utility projects in Oregon, community solar projects can go up to 3 megawatts. I believe the largest consumer-owned utility community solar project is somewhere around 200 kilowatts today. So big opportunity with new contract environments with BPA to maybe scale up considerably. And please do share with the portal if there are other barriers that we should be considering. And certainly if you have solutions to these barriers, love to hear about those as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about some potential solutions and some of these opportunities we're seeing moving forward. Certainly changes in the BPA wholesale power contracts will mean quite a bit. One thing as an aside that I'm curious about is sometimes Bonneville does impose some shaping charges, their RSS product on distributed generation, which can add significant costs. So how that looks in the new contracts is a big question for me, and I'd love to get that clarified. But moving into the future funding opportunities for community solar, Rob did a great job highlighting the resources available to single family and even multifamily. When it comes to utility-led and even owned community solar projects, there actually are quite a bit of funding resources that can apply to these projects, and it can result in pretty cost-effective project financial stacks. And so it depends on your utility structure and type and timing of when these resources might come available. But USDA also got a big infusion of dollars and upped the funding for REAP, which is the Rural Energy for America program. Electric cooperatives are eligible for that funding as rural small businesses. And that can fund up to 50% of a community solar project, capped out at $1 million. And so certainly reach out to us or the USDA state office to explore those. There are also loan guarantees and other types of financing that USDA provides to co-ops that they're a great resource. Odo obviously has had its CREP Community Renewable Energy project funding opportunity for a number of years, maybe subject to further appropriations, but targeted for public agencies. So our public utility districts and municipal utilities would be eligible applicants if there's funding in that program. Traditionally, it's been very challenging for our consumer and utilities to leverage federal tax credits, especially for very small projects or even medium-sized projects. It's just very expensive to structure tax equity partnerships. Well, the game has been changed now, and we have direct payment options. We have transferable tax credits. So now that investment tax credit should be available to most community solar projects that are advanced. And there's a number of adders applicable as well if you're using domestic content. There is a low-income adder that is a competitive application that can apply. So some tribal projects can receive, I think, up to 70% in terms of a federal tax credit, which is a world of difference from the challenges that we've seen even just a couple of years ago. And then lastly, we do have this Oregon Climate Protection Program that could be realizing significant dollars for this purpose. The program was executive order and is under legal challenge, so it may be a question mark if it materializes, but if it does, it could mean significant dollars for both economic and environmental outcomes that have an equity focus. And so that is really what we're talking about here with Solar for All. And then lastly here, I list technical assistance as a big opportunity where, a meaningful part of this $100 million Solar for All budget in Oregon can go to technical assistance. And so, with the barriers I've shared, and I'm sure there is more when we talk about workforce and community engagement and realizing these meaningful benefits, really hearing from the community and from stakeholders on this call of what type of assistance is needed will help the team here better craft that for better outcomes. Next slide. So just touching here on some of our lessons learned and takeaways over the years around kind of the important factors in how community solar can be successful, and what are kind of the critical elements that we've seen to enable projects. And really the first one is enabling that virtual bill crediting. There are challenges with renters and their landlords, and whether you can do rooftop solar everywhere. And to really reach the lowest income brackets, having that kind of virtual asset in terms of the bill credit is really just the most direct way to realize those outcomes when we're talking about equitable access to solar and meaningful benefits and bill savings. That virtual bill crediting is something that that is a big tool. And also securing grant funds will maximize just the long-term value to any subscriber, whether it's low income or otherwise. And so that list of funding opportunities is really important to keep in mind. Is the more we can fully fund these projects, the more benefits will accrue to low-income participants, because you're not having to pay a loan off or pay debt service or pay out of pocket. We're going to try to cover as much of that upfront as possible. At least that's been BEF's approach over the years. Another approach that we have taken is directing corporate donations into projects. We have a relatively modest tribal renewable energy fund where if corporations are participating in our other programs or buying some of our environmental products, we give them the option to donate additional money to facilitate tribal energy projects. And then some of the other partners here, Ryan, Rob, and others talked about community engagement and how community-based organizations are really important in kind of pairing projects and the benefits they bring with community members. And for us, what that means is capacitating partners. How do we provide long-term certainty that our community-based organizations are at the table, committed, bring the right motivations and expertise, and can do that over a multi-year period is a big part of having a strong partnership and having those partners help achieve some of the goals that we're striving for. So that's part of it, is making sure the partners are appropriately resourced and have the capacity to engage. And then also co-creating projects with those partners. So, whether it's a consumer-owned utility and, a CAP agency in that community, making sure that both sides of that partnership are adequately resourced and collaborating for mutual benefit. The other thing here is patience, consistency, and longevity. Especially dealing with community-based organizations, that longevity is very important, to know that these partners will be at the table over a multi-year period, and you're working in the same direction towards the same goals. And that's a big part of success for these projects. And lastly, there meaningful benefits and wealth building. That's been a priority for us. EPA wants to see a minimum of 20% savings on average to a household, and that means their essentially their annual electricity bills. They want to see it reduced by at least 20%. Some folks might argue that is not meaningful enough, and even in our investor-owned utility territory program, they now require low-income subscriptions to save 40% on their subscription. So if we can go above and beyond 20%, I think that would be much more meaningful. Next slide. A few resources for folks to look at, for municipal utilities, for cooperatives, some financing opportunities, and there's many more. We could, I think EPA even has a long spreadsheet list of resources that folks can peruse. But I will just leave with one last thought that Rob alluded to. So BEF is here and committed to the consumer-owned utility community solar program in Oregon. We feel like we can fill a good role here within the state and have Odo in the lead. We did a bit of outreach in other Northwest states, and Odo is pretty well resourced and staffed, but in the states of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, that is not the case. So currently BEF is pursuing applications in those 3 states to essentially be the prime applicant and fill this role that Odo is. So hopefully there will be some synergies across these programs, and we can share lessons learned and share program design elements. But we're going to have our work cut out for us over the next 6 to 8 weeks in getting some strong applications in. So any suggestions and support from stakeholders here and communities is definitely appreciated as we work towards achieving these meaningful benefits. I think that's it for me, Rob. Contact info there.
All righty. Thank you, Evan. A lot of great information there. And now we will move over into our workforce discussion. And I'd like to pass it off to Wendy Simons.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Can you hear me? Just quick sound check.
Yes.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Rob said, my name is Wendy Simons. I work as an energy policy analyst at Odo, and I'm supporting this Oregon Solar for All application on workforce and contractor development issues. So just a quick overview of my presentation. I'll begin with a summary of the meaningful benefits relating to workforce development and quality jobs that are in the application evaluation criteria for the Solar for All competition. I'll then discuss some of our initial thoughts on workforce and contractor development after our initial round of conversations with several stakeholders. The opportunity announcement includes evaluation criteria around job quality, which I will summarize, and then finally I'll wrap up with some of our questions to stakeholders who are participating today. And those questions will also be included in the comment portal if you prefer to provide written feedback, or if you'd like to forward the comment portal link to some of your associates. So starting off, you may recall that my colleague Jen Sunner spoke in her introduction about the meaningful benefits that are expected outcomes for Solar for All. And also just to mention as a tie-in to Evan's presentation, he mentioned technical assistance, and this whole area of contractor and workforce development is part of the technical assistance, kind of falls under that umbrella for the Solar for All program. So the meaningful benefits under Solar for All include several things, as people have mentioned, savings on energy bills and greenhouse gas and other environmental benefits. But it also includes, I'll quote, investing in high quality jobs and businesses in low income and disadvantaged communities by supporting prevailing wages, investing in effective workforce training programs for underserved populations, for example, pre-apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs, and prioritizing equitable economic opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses and contractors. Throughout the application, that there are a few other mentions of possible uses of the funds. It's not restricted, I think. There are several possibilities that could support job development, training, and contractor development that can serve the goals of the Solar for All program. So examples of programs that could include, and this, again, this is not exclusive, it could include workforce training programs that enable underserved communities to participate in the energy transition and the opportunities in the marketplace. Wraparound supportive services, case management, on-the-job support and mentorship for workers or potential workers in the industry. The application opportunity announcement also mentions project labor and or community benefits agreements as a tie-in to the workforce and contractor development area. Next slide, please. So starting off with the workforce development, just a few of our overarching thoughts. We're planning one workforce track serving all 4 of the solar kind of programmatic tracks. So there would not be, we wouldn't be separating things out specifically for community solar or single family or multifamily. We're trying to help support the development of workforce and contractor base for solar statewide for all 4 of those tracks. We have been told, and I've heard from more than one person and more than one organization, that this is a fairly crowded space already. There are many different organizations, community-based, government, private and public educational institutions, and other agencies who are working in this space of workforce training and development. So we'd like to leverage the existing programs and the work that is already being done by existing organizations, but help to expand their capacity and reach when it comes to the solar workforce. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel or for Odo to be running any new workforce or contractor development programs per se. Another theme that has come up so far in our initial round of conversations with stakeholders is that people are seeing a need to extend some of the current and emerging opportunities in workforce development from the Portland metro area to other regions of the state. We know that there's been a lot of thought, discussion, and work that has happened as part of and with the support of the Portland Clean Energy Fund, for instance, that could be replicated or modified to be used elsewhere in the state, or could provide useful lessons for how to build a skilled workforce for solar installation and related work in energy efficiency or preparing homes so that they're ready for solar, as well as the work that could happen on multifamily or community solar. Our initial conversations so far seem to indicate a few ways in which Solar for All funding could help to build upon some of this existing work. I've listed a few of them on the slide. Expand efforts to expose potential workers to the industry so that students and other people in the community can get to know about these opportunities and know a little bit more about what working in the industry might be like, the types of jobs there are, the types of training that is needed to get some of these jobs. And it is not just installers, but other related work that needs to happen with design and contracting, for instance, to make installations happen. We're also hearing that particularly to reach a lot of underserved communities or disadvantaged communities or other populations that may not have participated in the energy sphere in the past, that expanding pre-apprenticeship opportunities is very important. It gives people who've maybe been just exposed to it an opportunity to go a little deeper before they maybe dive into a degree program or start applying for an apprenticeship program, for instance, that could be a multi-year endeavor. We've also heard about the need to provide support for training in rural areas and also wraparound services for trainees. And lastly, we've heard about the need to expand contractor training and capacity building so that small contractors, kind of from, as mentioned, under the meaningful benefits from minority and women-owned contractors, for instance, can benefit from support and training to develop some of their business-related skills so that they can be ready to expand their business or help make their business more profitable to take advantage of the Solar for All funding. And also some of them could benefit from technical training, for instance, to be able to install storage as well as solar. So making sure I've hit all of these points I wanted to make. So one other point that we've heard recently in some input from some of our conversations is that making it easier to connect trainees with potential employers, and that some method of making that connection between people who've recently finished training or have upskilled with employers in this space, that could be a good use of Solar for All resources. So we're very much welcoming input on how to do that if people see that as a good use of funds. And we're also just welcoming input in general today or in the comment portal about what you people who are interested in this and working in this space, what you see as the priorities for Solar for All resources over the next 5 years, and where we should prioritize investing some of these resources. So please share your views and sign up on our email list. So next slide. Just getting up to my notes. So the EPA encourages applicants for Solar for All to review the U.S. Department of Labor and Commerce's 8 Good Jobs Principles for guidance on what constitutes a good job as we're developing our workforce and contractor development plans. These principles, Good Jobs Principles, include, but are not limited to, a stable and predictable living wage for all workers, families sustaining benefits that promote economic security and mobility, including retirement contributions, the choice to form and join a union, transparent opportunities for advancement, and safe and healthy working conditions. This program aims to expand workforce opportunity for underserved communities as defined by the Good Jobs Initiative, who often face disproportionate barriers to training and employment. So there's a Good Jobs Toolkit on the U.S. Department of Labor website, which provides additional resources. And I believe the slideshow has a link to the Good Jobs Principles. And I think if you go to the Department of Labor and Commerce's website, you will find links or things. You'll be able to follow it to get more information. So next slide. Sorry, it's my last slide, yeah. So we have a few questions here, and they also appear in the portal. So we'd love to get input from those of you who work in this space or are just interested in this program. The first is what should be the workforce development priorities. As I mentioned earlier, we've heard a lot of work and discussion around workforce and contractor development is happening in Oregon already, and it's a somewhat crowded space with organizations. But we'd like to hear more from stakeholders about how to prioritize Solar for All resources, like which type of engagement or work would be most helpful to use these valuable resources, which will be available just in the next 4 to 5 years. At this time, we're thinking that we may provide funds for some or all of the activities listed on this slide through a competitive process. There could be some functions that would be better served by a contract situation. So we're definitely interested in hearing more ideas from groups, and we'll be continuing our conversations with stakeholders. Second question, the Solar for All opportunity announcement also prioritizes opportunities for minority and women-owned contractors. And we would welcome input on how to support those businesses, as well as solar energy contractors who serve low-income and disadvantaged communities, and members of disadvantaged and low-income communities who own or aspire to start solar contracting businesses or related businesses. Third, we would also welcome input on ways that the Solar for All program can encourage the creation of high-quality jobs that meet the Good Jobs principles. The Solar for All opportunity announcement mentions project labor and/or community benefits agreements as possible avenues to work toward providing high-quality jobs. And we'd welcome input on whether and how to incorporate any kind of agreements with contractors or the community into Oregon's program, if that would be a helpful avenue. And I think that's my last slide.
Great, thank you, Wendy. So moving on as to how everyone on this call and anyone who might be watching it after the fact through the recording later can engage with us as we go through the final stages of our application process and then thereafter. So if you are interested in providing written feedback, you can do so through our portal, and we have the link embedded on the slide there. I believe it's also been dropped into the chat. But that is going to be open for a while for written feedback to be submitted that we will be able to further consider as we're drafting our application. Additionally, if you are interested in providing a letter of support for our application, please feel free to include that either through the portal or by sending us an email, and we can certainly reach out to work with you and provide a template for that letter of support. And then lastly, one that I think we are all optimistic about, that if we are successful in our application, we hope that you would participate in any further planning efforts that may be needed, particularly if we take advantage of the planning year, if we happen to be fortunate enough to be awarded in this competition. And so if you'd like to follow the application process, we've included a link on the bottom of the slide where you can see some information on our website, on the Oregon Department of Energy's website for Solar for All. And on our website, there's also an opportunity to sign up for different mailing lists through our email listserv, which includes federal funding opportunities as well as a variety of other programs that you can sign up for. So next slide, please. All right, so with that, I'd like to open the floor up for any questions, comments, or items that any one of us as members of the coalition can help either answer or consider as we move forward.
Jen, if we have no comments, we'll give it another moment, but we do have a couple in the chat that may be worth discussing.
Great, great. While people get their thoughts together, maybe we can turn to those that are in the chat.
Okay, Tom Bartlett from Ashland said that they have a virtual net metering program that works like meter aggregation. And Tom, perhaps you can expand more and then we can respond. Is Tom still there? Okay, we'll move on to the next one.
That's great.
Ray Sanchez Pescador, are you still around? Oh, okay, we may need to take people off of mute, and I'm not sure if I can do that. Someone just cued me in. Are they on mute? I'm not sure who has control right at the moment. Oh, we've been notified that they're not here anymore.
Okay, great. Well, let's see. So we'll go on. I see we are getting some questions in the chat as we're going through. Oh, and it does look like Ray is here. So we will work with you, Ray, to try to figure out how to get you unmuted, but maybe we can take a different question in the,
Can you hear me?
the interim. Oh, yes, there you are. Great.
There we go.
Good.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you. Yeah, this was towards the grant programs that I think Ryan was talking about with Energy Trusts and other organizations. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we had when we built our first community solar project, and now we're going to have again, is we're trying to focus on building a 100% low income community solar project here in the Rogue Valley. The challenge that we have is that all the grants that we apply for or are going to be applying for pay after the fact. And I can see that for small organizations like ours and small communities like ours, this is a major problem, because that means that you somehow have to come up with the $1, $2, $3, $4 million that the project's going to cost to build it. And then the grantors are going to reimburse you. But that doesn't quite work for a small organization like that. So I was trying to understand if there is any way that monies could be provided to small projects upfront to reduce those financing hurdles.
That's a great question. I'm going to see if perhaps Evan would like to chime in if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is
Sure.
I think this one's actually in my stack with
Okay, sorry, Ryan.
Sorry, no worries. It's a really good point, Ray. I think that you're absolutely correct that that's kind of a barrier that doesn't just apply to community solar projects. That's certainly going to be a barrier in the single family space as well. I think that asking a low income household to make a payment and then have reimbursed afterwards clearly won't work. Likely will also apply to some of the contractors we're potentially working with. So I think across the board, the timing of payments is going to be something that has to be woven in, and definitely you bring some firsthand experience of how that's going to be challenging, specifically in the community solar case for community scale projects.
I would add to that, Ryan, that this could be an opportunity to build in some services or an approach with technical assistance to help raise projects or like projects access construction financing. Now, I know that doesn't always help on like the development expense, and that's a big barrier that we've seen, but providing some direction or some framework where projects can access private sector lending to finance their projects and have that built into your assumptions and your pro forma. I mean, that's a possibility, so you don't have to come out of pocket for that. Adds a little bit of cost to your overall project, but a construction loan is less costly than a term loan that's 10 or 20 years long.
Great, thank you. I think that's a topic we'll need to do more consideration on as we move forward, but thank you for raising that.
Okay, the next question we have, I think, is from Toby. Toby, are you still here? Well, Toby
Yes.
asked, okay, thank you. Would solar EV charging placed in disadvantaged community parking lot stations be considered?
That's an interesting one. The way that I am reading the opportunity announcement, it seems like it's not focused on transportation, but is really focused on households, on residences. So I don't think that's an angle we have considered so far. That is certainly something we could take a close look at the opportunity announcement and see if it would be permissible, but at least.
Forgive me.
Okay.
Well, I would just add that, it's solar, it's distributed in the parking lots of a disadvantaged community. It's consistent to that goal. We could structure the finance where a single entity takes care of all the finance and let the people just have it for free. And because it doesn't touch a grid or any other utility, really small footprint, kind of very practical. So we could place these in a very distributed fashion. And you just maybe target, even level 2 charging, which would be great for people who park for a while, people who work or for shopping. And that way it doesn't save the world with DC fast charge, but it does add really quite extensive value. Some, like even 5 kilowatts puts quite a bit of range into a level 2. So those were the reasons why it kind of overlaps. I realize it's for residential, but with such a distributed parking lot type of approach, you don't have to touch roofs or any other complicated regulatory affairs. But
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. My initial impression is that it most likely wouldn't, because we wouldn't be able to demonstrate the minimum household savings in quite the way that I think the EPA is envisioning. But thank you for raising that. I think we'll definitely at least take a second look.
Well, thank you. You bet.
Okay, the next one is from Vito and it regards how the program will handle getting savings to residents of a subsidized household. Can Oregon get a statewide waiver from HUD?
That is a fantastic question. I think if Rob is available, I'd love to try to bounce this one over in his direction.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but in the way in which our programs currently work and the way that we're proposing the single family program, the rebates go through a contractor network. And so they essentially are upfront reductions in project costs. And if we do this correctly in the low income space, we'll have little or no financial involvement with the actual homeowner. So I don't know if that starts to get at the question. I see that Ryan and Evan are both on screen, so if they have more to add, I would welcome their thoughts.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Ryan, if you have something.
Sure. Yeah. In the Oregon Community Solar Program space, we've gotten a clarification from HUD that the bill credits that customers receive do not count as income, and so the utility allowance issue is fortunately sidestepped with the Oregon Community Solar Program. So residents in affordable housing properties, any resident that pays their own utility bill can enroll as a subscriber in the Oregon Community Solar Program and receive the benefits. For residents that don't pay their own utility bill, if the housing provider pays it on their behalf, there's also a mechanism for the housing provider to receive the benefits and then pay the majority of those benefits through a separate payment to the resident. So there is kind of a pathway there, specifically in the Oregon Community Solar context. But for on-site installations could be a bit trickier.
Yeah, and I would maybe invite Vito to unmute, as he might be the expert in the room here on this topic. But we struggled through solar on multifamily affordable housing for a few years, and it's been a while since I've looked at this topic. And my assumption is that it boils down to who the funding entity is of that specific property. And so a HUD subsidized property might be treated a little bit differently than if it's a low-income housing tax credit property versus if it's a USDA rural development subsidized property. And I did get a similar takeaway from what Ryan just said, that if it is a kilowatt hour bill credit on a utility bill, it is not income. But if your rent plus utilities is calculated as part of your total cost of housing and your utilities go down, it could raise your rent in some instances. So it's definitely a component to build into a program if we're addressing multifamily. And Vito, if you have more clarification, I'd please love to hear it.
You guys hit on all the issues. I think with community solar, it's easier. We found in Illinois that we can effectively work with HUD to not recognize bill credits from community solar as income, so that they're not raising rents or reallocating. So I think that there's a way to do it just sort of statewide. HUD is loath to do any kind of blanket statements or rules, but they will work with states and programs so far for community solar. So it sounds like you've already have that established for the existing program, which should be easy enough to extend to solar for all. It does get more challenging though if you're working with subsidized multifamily with distributed generation. There was an example earlier you gave where you were able to do things like shift to a master meter and take away the bills, which is great. I mean, in other states, utilities will fight tooth and nail not to let that happen. So if you can pull that off, I think that's, that's a practical way of doing it. But you still have to look at the subsidized housing allocations, and we're still battling that sort of issue in Illinois. So I didn't know if you guys had thought about it or have any solutions.
I think we're going to lean on our year of planning to figure out some of these questions. And then maybe as we loop in Oregon Housing and Community Services a little more, they may have some good insight. I will just point out that, folks that are in affordable housing are receiving a subsidy and a benefit already. And there is a lot of Oregon's population that is not receiving that benefit. So there can be an equity consideration to reaching further beyond affordable housing with this program, but it will certainly be a component. Vito, while you have the mic, do you want to speak to your community-owned model as well that you put in the chat here? I'd be curious to learn more there.
Sure. I had one more thought I wanted to share on the issue with subsidized housing or just multifamily in general, where it becomes cost prohibitive to, wire individual arrays to individual meters. You do have meter aggregation, so that solves a lot of it. Where you might not have that, in Illinois we don't. We did at one point, but we don't anymore. But we started with using this concept of tangible benefits to residents of multifamily housing. So where meter aggregation wasn't available and it was too cost prohibitive to wire a bunch of arrays, we have a 50% savings requirement, and we were able to allow some multifamily owners who installed an array and offset, let's say, large common loads, because they do exist. They were or if it's a master metered building and they don't pay, and tenants don't pay electricity, but they have a huge load, the owner could put a large array on, offset as much of the load as possible, as long as they can show that 50% of the value is being shared as tangible benefits. And we've had a number of projects do things like offer free internet or other services within the building. We even had one public housing campus provide job training on site. And the value of the job training was sort of offset their tangible benefit requirements. So we got creative that way to, just to not exclude multifamily housing, particularly like master metered, naturally occurring affordable housing. Yeah, I'm happy to segue into that other question or thought anyway, if you'd like. And that is, so that was on a different topic. And there was a lot of good thought put into the idea of the community-owned projects, particularly community solar projects. And I know in Illinois, we've also been, we have some new mandates now. Our Solar for All program is in its 5th year, and we've had a lot of learning, and we have some new mandates now to really incent community owned projects. And this is particularly for community solar. And we've struggled to really look at long-term value. A lot of what's come to the surface in terms of proposed projects that gets over some of the financing issues that we're talking about and the value stack issues are larger developers who will do a transfer, will do a flip. And it allows them after 6 or 7 years to just transfer the ownership to a community-based organization, with the idea being that all of the incentives, including depreciation and tax credits and all that. So it's an equity flip. They get to effectively extract all of that value in those first 6 or 7 years and then turn over the assets. But what we've struggled with is that when you look, particularly with high savings requirements, that from that point forward, we're actually handing a pretty big risk to a community organization with managing things like subscriber management and customer turnover. And you're proposing actually having long-term project management be somewhere else, which is a unique way of sort of dealing with that risk. But it also eats away at the value because presumably they got to get paid. And if you have reduced value, because the only value that's left at that point is really the subscriber payments. And if that's reduced because of high savings and reduced because of paying a third party, there may not be a tremendous amount of value left. And is the risk really worth it? So I'm sorry, that's not really a question or a solution, but it's something to think about and something that we're battling with. And it's a little worrisome because we don't have a lot of long-term history to look back and see what true value is coming from owning these assets. And we're really scared that we're actually just putting a burden on these organizations.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's great considerations for us to have in mind as we move forward.
We have a few questions left, but I'm not sure if we have enough time to get through all of them. So I'm thinking we should probably hit up at least one workforce question before we finish. And then if everyone doesn't mind, if you have other questions, we're more than happy to take them through the portal, correct? Jen, Rob, everyone?
Yes.
We're happy to field those, right? So let's do at least one workforce question. And we have one from John Mark Townsend. How will this program handle getting savings to residents in farm worker housing homes across the state? Also, for workforce development, is there room in that arena for solar installation training?
All right, so thinking through this, I think maybe we'll just jump straight into the second part because it just to go straight to the heart of the workforce piece for time considerations. So with that, I'll hand it over to Wendy.
Thanks. I admit I'm not sure I completely understand the question, if the question is about training associated with farm worker housing or just training on installation in general.
Yeah, I was talking more towards training for installation in general, and if there was room in the workforce arena for that added work.
I believe so. I'd encourage you maybe to give us some more context, either through written comments about in what form you are thinking of, if you're thinking of that as part of on-the-job training that would maybe subsidize somebody working together with a contractor, or you're thinking of like the LRT, Limited Renewable Energy Technician apprenticeship program in Oregon, or
yeah, probably a combination.
More...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed what you said.
Oh, yeah, I would say probably a combination of all of those items, just to provide some additional training resources for folks that come to us that we want to explore those options.
Yeah, I think definitely the training, we'd love to try to hit those, hit that function in whatever seems to be the best way possible. So we'd love to hear some more from you in terms of how to make sure that that happens, if it's part of a pre-apprenticeship program for people who might want to go into an apprenticeship, a full apprenticeship program, or if it's supporting people who are training in a current apprenticeship program like the LRT program that, and hopefully you're familiar with that, and but other avenues as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear more from you, or if you'd like to, if you put something in the chat, we could either set up a direct conversation or submit some more comments and to Odo or to our portal about some of the best ways to make that happen and make sure that that type of training is included.
Awesome. Yeah, I can put my contact information and we can get a follow-up meeting scheduled. I'm more on the housing side for Oregon Human Development, but we do have an NFJP director that has a ton more insight. I just wanted to make sure she was preoccupied with another meeting at the moment. So I wanted to make sure to at least ask that on behalf of her. So for the subsequent meeting that takes place, she would also be there and be able to provide a little bit more information as to
yeah, great
stuff. So
yeah, please do that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for attending.
I think we may have time to field one more, and I'm just going to go to the end here. And this one is from Laura James at Pacificor. And how do you arrive at the $100 million total request, and how do you expect to allocate that across the 5 program areas? And that one I actually think we may be able to answer in the slides and the follow-up. But I'll leave that to Jen, Rob, if you want to add any additional details.
Yeah, I think I'll hand this one over to Rob. And one thing I will note is we are still considering if $100 million is the appropriate ask for the full application. So that is just kind of our initial thoughts. Could go up.
Yeah, and I'll add to that that initial $100 million concept was originally just perceived as a way to be most competitive within the small kind of carve out in the program. And in that way, it was somewhat arbitrary. But as we build up the actual proposed budget for each of these 5 tracks of the program funding, we'll get to our real number. That 100 million was preliminary. And again, it was contingent upon serving 10,000 homes at $100 million ask. And so if we go well beyond 10,000 homes in our volume estimates, we can also expand the budgets accordingly. So I think that's something we hope to get done in the next few weeks as we develop the narrative. And I would just share with everyone on the call that, don't be surprised if we end up above $100 million in the request as we develop our budgets. It's certainly a distinct possibility.
Well, I think we've gotten a lot of really good, actually great, insightful questions, and ones that will help us define the narrative and the application much better. But I'll throw it out here for one last moment to see if there are any final questions before I turn it back over to Jen for closeout. Going once, going twice. Okay, Jen, it's back to you. And just a note, we will accept comments in the portal, so keep them coming. We're going to be thinking about them, and we will respond to them. All right, Jen, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Once again, if you're interested in learning more, we have some of the links to our website for the Oregon Department of Energy, where you can learn more about Solar for All, as well as other federal funding opportunities. We look forward to reading more of your feedback and your questions through the portal, and working together to hopefully solve some of these challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.